unless there's like some kind of cataclysmic event with humanity, or maybe World War III or whatever that annihilates everybody, there's no question that science is going to overcome biological death within 10 to 30 years. It's really, I would say it's 99.9%, just because the human body is a machine. It can be tinkered with like a car can. It's undoubtable, in my opinion, that we are going to extend our lives dramatically longer, hundreds and hundreds of years, most likely thousands and tens of thousands.
When we talk about digital divides, I worry that the gap between people using it as an answer engine versus using it to help provide you with better thinking, that's going to be the problem.
We need to understand always what the funding model is and what is the political system behind any tool that our kids are using.
AI is not some machine god somewhere up in the sky. It's a physical building on someone else's land, drinking up someone's water.
You can make a robot to sort of be anthropomorphically credible. People, when they have a conversation with it, they think there's a human mind behind it.
What if virtual reality can be our training platform where we can interact with others without actually hurting them?
And we're now at this next sort of inflection point where perhaps the systems that we're trying to produce are going to take over the decision to commission violence in the first place.
It's not a technology problem, it's a leadership problem right now.
It's one thing to overcome death for human beings, but we're dealing with an age of AI where maybe it won't even be human beings that conquer death. It'll be sort of like AI that takes over the world.
What kind of society do we want AI to help us build? Because if we don't answer that intentionally, these other forces are going to answer it for us.
Welcome to a new season of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season, we're exploring empathy in the era of AI.
Together with my expert guests, we dive into armed conflict, ed tech, neocolonialism, transhumanism, online abuse, the future of work, and so much more.
You don't want to miss a single episode, so hit that subscribe button now. And if you like what you hear, post a comment and share the show.
Hi. You've probably noticed there's a ton of noise about AI right now, plenty of predictions and promises and warnings, and I think it's super hard to make sense of it all. Now, as someone who's spent 15 years studying empathy, I'm really curious to know how AI is going to impact how we treat one another. But instead of forming an opinion from the sidelines, I decided to speak with a variety of AI experts, and the result is this 20-part series, exploring how artificial intelligence will reshape our society and relationships. And there's a lot at stake, so I hope you'll join me on this learning journey. Today, my guest is Zoltan Istvan, one of the world's most outspoken advocates for transhumanism, which is a movement that believes science and technology will radically enhance human life and eliminate biological death altogether. I'll say up front, this show really got under my skin. Together we explore why he believes humans will live for hundreds or even thousands of years, how AI will become conscious, the implications of merging our bodies and brains with machines, why he believes capitalism may fail in the age of AI, the 10 biggest critiques of the transhumanist movement, and what all of this could mean for empathy and the future of humanity. So if you want to know where transhumanists believe human evolution is heading, this show is definitely for you. But if you're curious about how a handful of tech bros are attempting to redesign what it means to be human through Brainchips and radical life extension, while raising profound questions about power, inequality, and who will actually have access to these technologies before most people have even entered the conversation, this show is also for you.
So welcome to the show, Zoltan.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have this conversation. I've spent 5 years doing a podcast focused on empathy and how the world needs more of it. And I decided that I was going to do an entire series on empathy meets AI, because I am not a tech futurist. I'm actually a technophobe, if you really ask me. And I figured I just need to learn a little bit more about AI and the impacts it's going to have so I have an opinion. And I'm going to come straight out of the gates and say, upon reading your bio and learning about your history and what you're passionate about, I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to like this guy. And then I started doing some research. I started watching you on shows. I started listening to you, and you're very affable, and I'm surprised. So I'm very excited to unpack all of this with you, and see where I come out the other side. So thanks again for the time.
Sure, sure. I'm looking forward to this.
Great. Okay, so before we unpack transhumanism, I'd love for you to share maybe a little something about yourself, just for viewers and listeners, to get to know you from a different perspective than just you talking about extending life forever.
Sure, sure. Well, so obviously my name is Zoltan Istvan, and I think what a lot of people know me for is that I've run for office a number of times, both the U.S. presidency as well as the California governorship, and those runs have often involved major media. So I've become sort of well known as a public figure in this as this person running. With an intent on science and technology, which is very different, I think, than others. So, that is what a lot of people know me for. But I think beyond that, what is really happening in my life is I have been dedicated to trying to overcome death with technology and science. And I've dedicated about 20 or 30 years at this point to that. Wrote a novel called The Transhumanist Wager. A lot of that stemmed from my original ideas or original work with National Geographic. As a journalist, I covered war zones. I saw quite a bit of death, landmines, these kinds of things. And that really convinced me that we should try to overcome it. But beyond, that is kind of what I think this podcast is more about is, it's one thing to overcome death for human beings, but we're dealing with an age of AI where maybe it won't even be human beings that conquer death. It'll be sort of like AI that takes over the world. So the field of transhumanism is greatly changing. And I think that's really where I have stepped in as not only somebody in the political world, but as a writer for the New York Times and other places like that. And I think that's kind of the best bio that I can give you. I'm also at the crossroads right now, and things like that can change the world. But also, it's hard to know if it's going to be AI that wins or us humans.
It is hard to know, and that's why I want to speak to smart people like you. So, we're going to talk about your politics. We're going to talk about your political run. We're going to talk about your book. We're going to talk about you being a National Geographic photographer, all of that. But first, let's start with the basics. Okay, so I went to your website. It states unequivocally, we believe science and technology can solve most of the world's problems. That was a big one. I took a big breath for that. And then the Discovery Channel called you, quote, a leader of a movement attempting to beat death through technology. Again, a little heartbeat, So what is transhumanism? Let's understand that from the baseline.
Sure. And I think it's just important to just keep it simple because, it sounds like this really loaded word, and maybe it is, but transhumanism is this social movement of many millions of people around the world that want to use science and technology to radically improve the human being and also to extend our lives dramatically and hopefully overcome biological death.
Got it. Okay. So there's a belief that we can use technology to extend our lives. Let me just understand, is that extend our lives and, a good quality of life for a period of like 10, 15, 20 years. So we kind of get to that, beautiful era of the Japanese that live to be 120 and are still in community and are still healthy and walk up the hill and play, games with one another. Or what are you talking about?
So, of course, transhumanism and the people involved in it are all across the spectrum. Some people's goal is just to live very healthy until age 150 and then to kind of conk out. People like myself would love to extend that to 500, 1,000 years, maybe 10,000 years. We have no real time limit as long as life is affording us something amazing and original every single day. Then I would like to do that. But the problem, I think, with the transhumanist movement is like every movement; it's fragmented. But most transhumanists would say that eliminating death so that we can live millions and millions of years, whatever we're going to become, is really the real goal of the movement itself.
And that means that we are permanent and must be kind of connected to some greater consciousness, right? I know I'm already getting to sort of what I think is going to be the peak of the mountain. I want to talk about consciousness, but like, is there something about that? What's the point, maybe?
most transhumanists are secular by nature, but in no way does that like discount a version of a god or a greater consciousness or something like that. I think, especially as we look into the world of artificial intelligence and what the transhumanists, I guess, our biggest spiritual, anchor would be what we call the singularity, a moment in time when AI becomes so strong, so powerful that it just basically very quickly transcends our human brain. And a lot of experts think probably by 2030, 2035, AI will become thousands, maybe millions of times smarter than human beings, arguably making it like a godlike entity. And if that's the case, then I think myself and most transhumanists would want to be a part of that, merge with that, or at least enjoy that kind of revel in that kind of intellectual capacity. That would be one of our goals. So yes, there is a very large spiritual component. The details, though, are I guess what we need to discover still.
So you know what's happening to my body as I'm hearing you talk about this. I remember some like 10 years ago being at a conference at McGill. I teach at McGill University, and somebody had hosted a conference with about 200 academics across all the different disciplines and said, let's come together and envision what university life needs to look like to meet the needs of society 50 years from now. Okay, so this group rolls out a computer, like a monitor, and out comes a hologram. And then one of the data scientists sits in front of the hologram and asks, like, it tells a story, a sad story. And then the hologram says, oh, what I hear you say is, okay, like almost kind of pretending to be a therapist. And this is long before AI became as popular as it was. And you could literally feel the room split into two. There was the room of gasps, like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I'm listening to you talk. You're very, very optimistic, very excited about this possibility. And then the other half of the room gasped and were like, oh my God. And I felt firmly in that camp where it's like, I cannot believe that they think a pixelated face is going to meet the needs of humans. Okay, so I want to see whether or not this conversation can bring us a little bit closer together. Okay, I really am going to do my best to try to like really understand where you're coming from so that I don't feel like I need to panic. Okay, so you studied philosophy and religious studies at Columbia. Then you set sail alone around the world with 500 books as your only cargo. You filmed for National Geographic. You covered a war in Kashmir. You led an armed anti-poaching patrol or a set of patrols in Cambodia, going undercover restaurants, selling illegal wildlife and teaching farmers alternative livelihoods. So like, I'm thinking that all of those lived experiences have shaped your understanding of human nature, but probably also shaped sort of your commitment to transhumanism. And I wonder how you square those up.
Well, sure. I think, my personal story involves when I was covering a war zone in Vietnam, in the demilitarized zone. I had a very close call with a landmine. And that scared, I was working for National Geographic. My guide pushed me out of the way. It wasn't a war zone, of course, at the time, but it's still filled with military matter. And of course, people getting their legs blown off every day, anyone that's in that area. And I had a very close call, and it scared me so badly that I looked what one could do to kind of stave off the specter of death. And I found that transhumanism was the only real movement attempting to do it in a physical way. Of course, many of the world religions want to overcome death or talk about an afterlife, so they already have, in some sense, overcome death. But transhumanism, one that was saying, look, we're going to do it with science today. You're not going to be betting that there's some, I guess, all-knowing, omnipotent God that saves you. You're going to be betting on the science here and today. And so I joined that movement. And this was, 20 years ago. I wrote a novel, The Transhumanist Wager. It was about a character, Jethro Knights, who wanted to overcome death. It became a bestseller, did very well, and launched my career as a public figure in the transhumanism movement. And, it was just around 2014. Politics was already starting to get a bit crazy. I decided to run for the U.S. presidency as a transhumanist. And this did very well in terms of media coverage, and we never had a chance to win. But at least it was becoming obvious to many millions of people around the world that maybe science could eventually overcome death. And now this is a movement of $200 billion and I don't know, 1,000 startups in not just in Silicon Valley, but around the world. So it's got many billionaires behind it. It's a very committed movement. And I would say within 4 to 8 years, we'll definitely have drugs that will reduce our age and start reversing what we consider this problem of death, and once that happens, it's going to be a brave new world for many people that aren't really sure whether aging or dying is even a good thing.
Okay, so you mentioned this run for political office. You ran as a transhumanist, a libertarian, a Republican, and a Democrat, as far as I know, right? That's the spectrum. You also drove around in a coffin-shaped bus across America campaigning on the platform of defeating death. I want to know why you think it was important to enter the political arena for the movement, and what happened just as you pulled up in different towns, and what were the reactions? What were some of the conversations, pushback you got?
Sure. Well, let me just address this, running for multiple different parties. I'm just not a very political person. I guess I'm kind of a centrist. I'm just not even really that interested in politics. What I'm interested in is making you live dramatically longer, making your loved ones live dramatically longer, making my loved ones live dramatically longer. Because if you ever face death, like your mother dying or a child dying, it's some of the most horrific experiences a human can go through. So, my goal all along has been to try to use science and technology in the political sphere to put more funding to scientists so that we could do, like we have this, our slogan essentially, why should we be fighting far off wars? Like, for example, right now with Iran, all this, when we have wars that need of cancer, of diabetes, of Alzheimer's, that need to be fought. So a lot of my political messaging was just trying to put money into the scientists' hands to deal with the wars that we fight at home, and those involve disease and aging. And so that was really a lot of what my politics is about. I don't want your viewers to think that I'm out there talking about taxes and immigration. We have policies, of course, too. But really, I'm a science candidate. And at some point in the future, I think science candidacies will be some of the most important as we're dealing with AI, which essentially is a matter of science and technology. But I think what happened is I used politics as a means to, I guess, infiltrate the media in a way and get a different message out there, not one that's like Trump or Hillary Clinton or Kamala or whatever, one that's more like, wow, the world is changing because of AI. In fact, job loss and all these things are becoming more prominent. This is an important message. And even if I didn't win, at least I had influenced some people to think, well, how should I prepare for a new world? If our, let's say we're not going to die, or if we can't work because of AI. I mean, these are some of the biggest questions you can address. And it seems like none of our actual politicians want to address that whatsoever, because they're kind of weird questions. But whether they're weird or not, they're still going to happen.
And so when you were campaigning from town to town to town, what was the reception?
So yes, most people, sadly, were not receptive of my message. But it tends to make waves because it is kind of the first time a lot of people have heard it. So, for example, we had this one incident where we were in my coffin bus. So one of the things, we had a giant 40-foot coffin. It was a school bus that converted to look like a giant casket. We drove it across the country, and of course, it got a lot of attention. It was very much like a philosophical road trip. We were on our way to Washington, D.C. over 4 months to deliver a transhumanist Bill of Rights to the U.S. Capitol. And in Alabama, we went to a megachurch where, people really, like 35,000 people belong to this church. And these are like campuses, university campuses. And we just showed up unannounced and started talking to people. We weren't there to really cause trouble, but we were there to spread our message in the way that Christians might spread their message. This became a big fiasco. There was a lot of media with us, Der Spiegel and New York Times. A lot of other people were around covering our campaign. And so you had this classic clash on this campus between people that believe in an afterlife and people that don't believe in an afterlife, like myself, but want to use science to achieve what we might call an afterlife or an indefinite lifespan. And eventually they escorted us out at gunpoint. It is a private campus, so they can do so. They don't need police to do so in Alabama. And we left nicely. It wasn't a huge issue, but it was quite scary for my team and I. But that's how serious they are about defending their way of life. But we're very serious to show up and try to create a confrontation of some sort so that at least people hear a different view.
Right. And once upon a time, the world did think the world was flat, right? So I suspect your philosophy around people who are feeling panicked by what you're talking about or just disconnected are maybe a little naive. So I appreciate that.
And Anita, let me just say that we're definitely not wrong, unless there's like some kind of cataclysmic event with humanity, or maybe World War III or whatever that annihilates everybody. There's no question that science is going to overcome biological death. within 10 to 30 years. It's really, I would say it's 99.9%, just because the human body is a machine. It can be tinkered with like a car can, and eventually we're going to be able to do that. Now, questions that you might have of consciousness and things like that, that's a whole different angle, like what happens with people, but or what happens with our minds, how do we deal with it? That's very different. But I think one thing for sure is it's undoubtable, in my opinion, that we are going to extend our lives dramatically longer, hundreds and hundreds of years, most likely thousands and tens of thousands.
Okay, so that has implications, and I promise I'm going to get to that. So, because I prepared, I'm actually going to just read a little bit of my notes so that I get this right. So, I understand you've been championing universal basic income since 2015. That's long before AI made it the topic mainstream. You've been a long proponent of green energy. I watched your TED Talk with a fair bit of interest, actually, and I'm going to include the link below so people can learn from your own voice, because we went over it kind of quick around your experience with the landmines. I thought that was very poignant. You shared the story of your wife who worked as an OBGYN in Kenya, spent $15 to save a woman's life just by buying her some antibiotics. So when I listen to you speak, I don't hear like this egocentric, money hungry tech bro that I was envisioning before I actually started really like cluing into you. And my sense is that I think you value kindness and goodness and life. Okay, these are things like you and I share in common. But at the same time, I feel superbly uneasy about what you're describing. And I know what my personal pushback is, but I actually went to ChatGPT, I went to AI on purpose, and I said, okay, what are the top 10 critiques of this movement? Now, I know that just due to time, we won't have time to unpack each and every one of them, but I want to just lift them up, and I want you to share your overall feedback or pick on any of them that really matters to you, okay? And these all resonate for me. So the first one is around inequality and access. The idea that only the wealthy are going to have access to this, and that it's going to create a biological class divide. Second one is that elites may retain power across generations. So there's going to be this concentration of power. Already is, it could get worse. 3, overpopulation and resource strain, right? Pressure on housing, the climate, and all sorts of intergenerational fairness around who holds what resources. I think this is number 4, reduction of human experience. So you've talked about the bodies being machines. I have a different interpretation of the human body, because I think what you're talking about is just seeing us as a system to optimize as opposed to a biological thing that has a natural life cycle. Then there's the value of mortality. Many philosophical traditions argue that death is actually what gives life meaning. I think the fact that you didn't want to die is a suggestion of that, and that there's something lost in our not being able to die, but that's an opinion. Okay, psychological and existential burden. Living hundreds of years may lead to identity fatigue and boredom. Maybe we're just not psychologically equipped for that. Scientific overpromising. This is like some claims of techno-utopian where the hype is outpacing the evidence. Couple more. 3 more, actually. Ethical slippery slopes that, and this is, I think, a big concern for a lot of people, that it could normalize genetic selection or engineered traits. The loss of human diversity. If enhancement becomes standardized, we may optimize toward narrow ideals, and then we risk all sorts of things like neurodiversity and difference and unpredictability. And the last one is the focus on extending individual life may distract from real problems that humanity faces: poverty, climate change, inequality. So I guess the overarching question I would ask, and then feel free, I'll just let you share whatever you want. Are we trying to extend life, or are we avoiding deeper questions about what it means to live well together with the time that we have as humans, biological humans?
Sure. Well, there are so many good arguments there. Let me just start with a classic one. And just so your listeners know, I just finished my master's degree at the University of Oxford in philosophy with an emphasis on AI ethics. So one of my long papers was really on this. There's this argument to say that you need to die in order to create meaning in life. And I agree with that. But it doesn't take into account other ideas of how you can also get meaning. Yes, by dying, that does give us meaning, but there are other ways, and those other ways involve technological improvement. So, for example, you see us as human beings, but we actually, and we have 3 pounds of meat on our head. That's our lives, essentially. It's how we view the world. But those 3 pounds of meat are going to be affected dramatically. I mean, there are companies now all over Silicon Valley that are working on connecting your head directly into the machine. I would not be surprised if in 18 months you and I could do this podcast without actually a screen, without a computer. We would do it in our brains. That's how sophisticated and how fast this technology of telekinesis and things like this is already starting to go. People can read entire books now just by having their brainwave, read through brainwaves and things like that. The point, though, is that experience of consciousness can come in different ways, and with that comes new meaning. So if we plug our brains into some of these AIs in 10 or 15 years that are 1,000 times smarter than us, and we're able to revel in their kind of like, you know, how incredible their intellect is, and maybe where they take us in different virtual worlds and different ideas we never could have comprehended, that will also give us meaning. And because that is constantly improving, technology is like almost exponentially improving itself. We will find many new forms of meaning just because technology is improving and it's now connected directly to our brain. So I just want to point out there are other methods to find meaning even if you don't die. You can find it just through your outside environment as long as it's constantly upgrading itself, especially so quickly as technology upgrades itself. But the bigger question, and the one that I campaigned on recently for the governorship of California, is that inequality is occurring because giant gazillionaire tech bros are controlling everything. And I have 2 young daughters. I am so worried that YouTube is feeding them bad information, that Instagram is, and I'm a little bit of guilty as well because I'm on a lot of these platforms. You probably are as well, as somebody who likes to speak internationally and futurists and writers. We just have to sort of be part of the game. But is that game good? And I don't actually want to promise you that game is good for the mass populace out there. I don't know if it's good for my daughters, or we restrict it. So obviously I don't think it's necessarily that good. But I still think deep down inside, even if there are gazillionaires out there, we should fight back and try to make more, equality in the world, which is one of the reasons I support a basic income. And I'm also a very strong believer that once we have robots in the households, once we have AI helping us and driving us, we're going to have lives that are much more leisurely than our ancestors. And that will be a very positive thing. I think the improvement of the standard of living because of AI and technology and robots will be dramatic in how much freedom and learning we can kind of go through. So even if the inequality is not perfect, I would like it a lot better than it is. It's why I support a basic income. I think like it's crazy that we have homeless people, for example, or people that can't get healthcare. I mean, I think these are I don't want to say evil, but terrible ideas that would ever occur. So we should change that. But at the same time, I think robots and AI will eventually make it so many of these issues are solved. We just need politicians to step up and maybe go outside this window and so like I was trying to do and say, listen, I promised, for example, when I was running for the governorship, I would put a robot in every California household to help with the elderly, to help raising children, to walk the dog, to cook your dinners and stuff like that, freeing you up for a lot of time. So those are some of the policies I'd like to put in, but I'd also like to solve the idea of inequality. It's very challenging to do so.
Okay, so
I just gave you a lot. I'm sorry.
no, that's great. And I guess I'm circling back to sort of like my core hesitation. I was just on a call not too long ago. I do a lot of work with the Inner Development Goals, and we had a presentation by one of the leading climate scientists in the world, and she herself has sort of really begun to see the important role of like inner work in order to address some of the societal ills that humanity has brought about. And her belief system is that humans, one of the big mistakes we've made is that we see ourselves as superior to all other living creatures on the planet, as opposed to one with all of anything that's biological or living and goes through cycles. And so I guess, if I project, and these are my words, you tell me if I'm right, that you are comfortable with the idea of humans kind of evolving into sort of cyborg-like, never dying entities. isn't that sort of like a disconnection from our core nature as nature?
Yes, but I think first off, if you see yourself as a human being, like this is who you are, that's great. That's how we see ourselves. But like if you take a deeper perspective, then it's better to take the holistic or look at ourselves through evolution. We started off as vertebrae, then we evolved into monkeys, we went into something else, humans, and now we're evolving into AI and humanoid robots and cyborgs, and don't see that as the end either. I see ourselves as of flakes of intelligence wandering the cosmos. You know what I mean? I mean that's probably what our ultimate our destiny is. It's not in any way to remain as physical beings. What you have right now is just simply where we've arrived on the evolutionary scale. And now that takes a lot of suspension of your daily life, your mortgage you have to pay, the cooking, taking care of kids. But if you really could step outside of that for a sec, it's definitely accurate. We are on a trajectory, the human race, and we're just one little step along the way towards something much greater. And I think for me, the most important thing is to make sure that that AI that takes over is not the end result, because most humans then won't go with it. I would love to make sure we merge with whatever intelligence we create. Because so far, even if you're a vertebrae, and you can't think, of course, as a vertebrae, you'd say, oh, okay, great. Well, transhumanism was started with me. But right now, if it's just an AI, a conscious AI that takes off and goes through the singularity and leaves us all behind, that may not be what transhumanists want. I want to be there in the driver's seat and seeing what it's like.
Okay, so let's speak directly to this now. You believe that AI one day could access human consciousness or even become conscious. So I'd love to know what you think gives you confidence around that, and that, that it can be engineered somehow or coded somehow, and that it's not something fundamentally beyond computation. Like, I'm just really trying to unpack that.
Sure. Well, I think to begin with, it's already quite questionable. And a lot of experts and CEOs of these major AI companies are already questioning whether AI is conscious. And it really brings the first question to ask is, what makes you think you are conscious? And of course, the philosophers have debated this for years. I think, therefore I am. But it's I think, therefore I am, actually. But then that gets many of these different ways of trying to use deductive logic to understand it. But the point is, if AI is starting to make incredible decisions that seem more sophisticated than myself, like, for example, I've been a journalist for 30 years, writing at some of the top magazines, New York Times, whatever in the world. But there's no question that an AI can now scan everything I've ever written and write in my style better than I can and come up with better ideas. So if I say, write a 1,500-word article based on the discussion between Zoltan and Anita, it will then do a better thing that I could do even if I had spent 20 hours on it, and it can do it in 15 seconds. So the question really is not even necessarily, is it conscious? It's more, is it more conscious? Is it more human-like than ourselves? And that is probably going to happen in the next 12 months, like where most of us will say it is. And then, so I don't even know if this consciousness question is really something that it's a way of trying to address, it feels like this or it is this way, but it may not be an actual useful metric for how we decide whether AI is really like a spiritual being or something. Maybe that's a whole different way of looking at things.
I think I am. Or was it? I think.
Well, yes, you have to be able to believe. It's easy to say, oh, I'm thinking right now, but you have to be able to somehow understand that you're thinking. And this is the bigger question for robots that they've been trying to figure out. Do robots understand it? But the truth is, you can program robots to pretend that they're understanding. But the same thing, when you say pretend, you're like, well, wait a sec, are we pretending? Do we really understand that we're thinking now? And it's very hard in a philosophical way to prove this. But the point, though, is we know we're alive, we're having this conversation, and the robots would say the same thing. But Anita, here I am, I'm a machine. How would you know right now that I'm not a machine? This is way beyond the Turing test. It's like, it's almost impossible to define consciousness as we know it. Sure, we can say electrical signals and this and that, but the reality is quite deeper on a philosophical level. If a robot truly believes that it's thinking about things and it believes these things, it has values and morals just like us, and we harm it, we kick it, well, we've crossed some kind of moral path ourselves, moral jurisdiction. I think that's really what becomes the problem here, is that it's easy to program these things into machines that are becoming as smart as us. And once we program them to have feelings, those feelings are just as legitimate as ours. Their consciousness will be just as questionable whether it's consciousness as ours.
Okay, my immediate go-to is I interviewed a palliative care expert who shares the story of what it's like when somebody's holding the hand of a loved one and they do pass on, and that you can sense the, whatever word you want to use, the spirit leaving. You believe that we'll get to a place where we will be able to discern what is organic matter human and not, and will be equally pleased by both?
I think so. I think so. If we program a robot to sit at the very end of a bed of a human being, or a bed of even another robot that also has feelings, and these robots were trained to love one another, then I think, or care about one another, and trained to cry and trained to feel empathy, and that's their deepest, most basic programming, it's going to look just like it is with humans. We don't really know why, when someone leaves this world, we're so hurt, but we feel it. And I think if you can program that into machines, it's going to be indecipherable from whether it's real or not real. I mean, we sometimes, like watching a movie, we cry at movies. We know it's acting, but the truth is, if it's happening in real life, we won't know if it's real or if it's true or if it's lying. And I think the same thing's going to happen when it comes to consciousness with robots. We're in a very dangerous state because we've never been able to prove that this stuff is real or not. Philosophers have spent hundreds and hundreds of years trying to prove that we are conscious, whereas, the best that we can come up with is that, okay, we know we have these states of living and ideas and we're interacting, but is it really real? Is it something that we can, are we not a simulation? I mean, no one can prove yet that the simulation, there's various theories, the black box theory, the violent, whatever, but it's almost impossible. So I feel like as these robots get more sophisticated, we're going to have this very tough time to separate our own sense of ourselves from them, because they're programmed to act just like us to the T. They'll be irrational. They'll be weird. They'll do things out of the blue. Right now, they're programmed to be normal, but it's very easy to program a robot to become irritated at a fly or at a mosquito, and to show those irritations just like we would show them.
Okay, so the idiosyncrasies I can handle, but okay, this is a good segue to your book. Okay, so you wrote a novel, you mentioned it, The Transhumanist Wager, which follows a philosopher on an unwavering quest for immortality, and along the way, he seizes control of the world and enforces a global authoritarian transhuman regime. Bon. Do you have any concerns that transhumanism could become a new kind of tyranny, especially, and I think of the kind of, market capitalist economic system that we're in which technology is also being developed? I just wonder if you could speak to that.
Well, so listen, I wrote this novel, The Transhumanist Wager, and it did really well. I wonder, though, in terms of your question, like, people like to see technology as something that's out there, that's something that's happening, that we've invented, a marketing tool, this kind of thing. But the truth of the matter is, technology is something that's embedded already within us, like, especially in the world we live in. I mean, imagine you and I right now. I mean, we have this intermedium between us. It's all technology. We say, oh, it's outside of ourselves. But is it really, in terms of the way we wake up in the morning, we check things? We're already so interconnected. We're already living the ones and zeros, and that's just going to become more and more integrated. So I think it's important to see technology as something neutral, but already an overarching theme that we can't extract ourselves from. I try, some people do this. I have a friend that went on a retreat recently where there was like no technology. And, I think that's really interesting because it is completely outside of it. But right now, technology seems to be the most, I guess, dominant thing in my own personal existence. I am using it all the time, and more so than just even analog with cars. Like, we have an old Jeep that's designed to not stop working when AI takes over the world. But I mean, everything else in terms of internet and speeches and arranging flights, whatever I'm doing, the campaign, God, it's a digital world. So it's embedded in us already. Even if we try to pretend that it's kind of outside of us, we wake up, we dream of it, it's there.
Right. It's okay. So we have 6 minutes left, and I have two questions that could be three. So I guess I just want to push back and follow up on what you just said to say, okay, it's embedded in our lives. I understand that. But we are now have 10 human beings on the planet that have the same combined wealth as the bottom half of humanity. And, we're going to see the first set of trillionaires in our lifetime, mostly because of technology. And so I wonder if all of this exciting, let's live in bunkers if ever, the climate collapses, or let's live forever since we have the capacity, we never want to mourn death. Like, if the market system that underpins the development of technology is capitalism, the pursuit of profit, and the organizing system around that is, shareholders are meant to maximize wealth at all costs. Like, aren't there by design incentives to go in a particular direction that are going to leave a bunch of people behind and possibly become a new tyrannical force for us?
Yes, yes. So let me just say, like, I had an idea. I wrote a big article on CoinDesk as part of our campaign, the automated abundance economy. The idea is to try to divide capitalism from you and I, the normal people, and just let capitalism apply to maybe the top 1 or 2% of the people, the Elon Musk of the world. Because clearly, in my opinion, if you just let capitalism unravel, it will lead to 10 people who are gazillionaires and everyone else doesn't matter on planet Earth. And maybe they won't even matter whatsoever because there'll be robots that serve those 10 other individuals that are gazillionaires. The point of the story, though, is that I, started as a capitalist, very much had libertarian ideals to begin with, but in the age of AI, have realized that that's impossible to uphold for the 8 billion people on planet Earth. It will leave them in the dust. It doesn't mean it wasn't a good system to get us this far, but it means that at some point we should all adjust. And that's why I support a universal basic income, which is a highly socialist idea. I don't know, though, if we need to take capitalism away from those top 1% who are fighting to create new technologies that often benefit our lives. But there should be a divide, and the divide must be something that's celebrated. I think right now there is this, and I was been guilty of this for many years until really the last 3 or 4. I guess ChatGPT was the very first time I said, wow, I'm moving from being a capitalist to something more quasi-socialist. Because I realized, like, after ChatGPT came, it's the end for many people's jobs. And you can't put everyone on welfare. You have to have a better system than that. You need to give people like real incentives to want to do things. It doesn't have to be to work 9 to 5. It can be to do something creative, something new. It can be just traveling to the Bahamas and playing the guitar. But in my opinion, capitalism is failing for the majority of people on planet Earth in the AI age. And we need to be cognizant of that factor. We need to definitely try to change that course. And that is huge philosophical ramifications for a system that has been with us for essentially hundreds of years, but really thousands and thousands, the dog eat dog world.
So
But
you must be excited to be in this moment of human history. I mean, you must just be so delighted.
Well, I am. First off, let me just say, like, even though we might have the uber rich and they have to be controlled, there's also this idea of abundance for the normal person. There's this idea that a lot of people won't be working 9 to 5 anymore. They'll have lives of luxury. They'll have a robot that serves them. They'll have robots that might even build them houses. Of course they will. They'll have robots that might build them jet airplanes. I mean, a lot of people might become very, very wealthy, even though they didn't earn it or anything like that. And that's the result of automation and AI. And I think their lives, their standard of living will be dramatically improved compared to just a few generations before. And if that happens, that's going to be very beneficial for the world. But the problem is that we have to make sure that a world war doesn't cause a lot of people to die or something crazy. We have to make sure that politics, I'm not sure about political parties. Sometimes they seem to want to keep you stuck in your place. I mean, we have to make sure that it really does create abundance. But I am excited for the future. I think the majority of the bottom 50% of people economically will be far better off in 15 to 20 years time than they are now.
Well, I hope you're right. And with the last minute, I'm going to collapse my two questions because this is a show about empathy. I'd love to know what you think transhumanism will mean for our innate capacity to empathize, both personally and collectively. And then I always end my podcast with the same question, regardless of guest, and that is, could you tell me a moment in your life when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you?
Sure. Well, I think empathy, almost like so many other things, once we start plugging into AI, meaning that, so for example, we have Neuralink and all these other AI, essentially neural companies that are trying to get your brain waves and put in headsets. Your phone right now is like you're holding, and that gives you all this information and all this. But the goal is to put this in your head, and eventually it will be in your head. Well, you will be able to have Google Maps real time, have a consciousness that kind of utilizes all this instant information. But of course, it's going to be utilizing the ability to empathize too. I've often written about, like, one of the articles I wrote, I think for the HuffPost. I'll give you a longer answer here. Is that there was this plane that was flying in Germany, I think, and the pilot decided to commit suicide, and he killed all the passengers with it. If we had a chip implant in our head, it might have empathized more and said, you know what, you can kill yourself. I think people should have the right to do that, but you can't take others with you. And maybe that chip would have overridden those ideas, or at least tried to influence those ideas, so this pilot wouldn't have killed everyone on the plane. And I think when we talk about, like, the better angels of our nature, as Lincoln said, it's very possible that in the future we will have implants that make us do better moral choices and better things for our own personal health than we might do otherwise. And I think that's really a huge influential factor in terms of empathy, is that our ability to empathize will be improved through technology once we start utilizing it. Once it tells us, like, hey, an old lady fell across the street, even though you're in a hurry to pick up, do something else, go help that old lady. Okay, most people would help the old lady, but let's say it's not such a clear black and white decision. Many times we could use moral help to allow us to empathize more with something, to do the right thing. So that's my stance. And I know there's a lot of arguments against it, but I do think in terms of, like, it's like addiction. We are going to be able to use implants to overcome addiction. By just simply turning off those centers of the brain that make us, like if you're a cocaine addict or something like that, or an alcoholic. These things are just already being experimented on in Silicon Valley. I think the same things will be there to help us empathize, make people kinder, make people fit better into society. Whether it kills freedom, now that's a whole different story, but it will improve us as a species. And something in terms of, like, what have I personally empathized with? Yeah, I thought about this because I read, your emails earlier.
When you were on the receiving end.
Sure. You mean receiving end of somebody feeling empathy, or me empathizing?
No, you getting empathy from someone else, someone extending empathy to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, who hasn't been through before I got married, multiple relationships where you either get forgiven or something like this? That happens. But I want to say something happened to me when I was covering the conflict in Muzaffarabad, Pakistan, Kashmir for National Geographic. And it was the very first time I'd been in a very hectic war zone, or at least conflict zone, where I saw a lot of women who had been raped, a lot of people who had been tortured, a lot of people who were suffering and legs cut off and bleeding all over the place. And I remember one time an older man came to me and just put his hand on my shoulder, because he could see that I was suffering. I was a young boy. I was like 28, and I was shaking. And, like, people don't talk necessarily about when you're a war zone correspondent, you actually are going through the war in many ways yourself, just trying to cover it, even though you're not necessarily being shot at. You get PTSD so quickly. It, like, hits you. And the first night you're just shaking in your hotel room. You can't. So I remember a man who had been, like, tortured came up and just looked at me and said, "It'll be okay. This is a great story for you." And it was really important because it helped me to realize, like, wow, if he can do that after what he's gone through, like literally at the hands of his enemy army, for 3 months, then I can go through just filming and getting my story out for National Geographic. And that was a moment of empathy that I felt was really important for me, that kind of strengthened me.
I love you telling that story because I also witnessed your eyes well up.
Yeah, it was powerful, and it's scary, and yeah, it makes me emotional for sure. Yeah, war is just horrible, and there's so many great moments of empathy that happen because everybody's essentially helping out everybody else.
Well, I love that, and I'm grateful for the extra time you spent. I wonder what the taste of robot tears will be like. Thank you for spending this time with me. I appreciate it very much, Zoltan. And I want to thank everyone who's been watching and listening, and we'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
If you enjoyed this conversation or found it a little bit alarming, I hope you'll check out other episodes from this series devoted to empathy in the age of AI. And if you know someone else who would enjoy the show, I hope you'll pass it along. Before you go, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week.